We are Project Play, done by Kelsey Bean, Salem Bortcosh, Janaye Callaghan, and Brooke Gard. Our goal is to promote an active and healthy lifestyle in elementary students to reduce obesity through adolescence and into adulthood. Our priority population are children in East County, San Diego elementary schools. We have many objectives. Our learning objective is to increase children's knowledge of healthy choices by 25% by comparing a progressive survey from the beginning, middle, and end of the school year. Our behavioral objective is to increase children's productivity by 10% when they are making food choices. Our process objective is to mandate 3 10-minute exercise routines daily in class for all students of each grade level. Our first outcome objective is to decrease the average BMI among all elementary students in East County, San Diego by 5% in 1 year. And our second outcome objective is to reduce the incidence of type 2 diabetes by 5% among our cohort versus their high school's average. We have 3 main evaluation questions measuring A, BMI, B, knowledge, and C, rate of type 2 diabetes. So, is there a measurable difference in A, B, or C between the experimental and comparison group at both the first and second post-experimental observation? Our conceptual model is based on the social cognitive theory. A change in knowledge about nutrition and exercise through Project Play's program will encourage a change in dietary and exercise behaviors, resulting in a change in BMI, and then finally a change in incidence of type 2 diabetes. Our research design is quasi-experimental, pre-test, post-test design. We use convenient sampling for the 2 public elementary schools in East County, San Diego to reduce contamination where and when possible. For our evaluation design, we have many variables. Our independent variable is which cohort each individual is a part of, comparison or experimental. Our dependent variables are as follows: knowledge and proactive healthy choices about nutrition, which are surveys, that's a ratio. We have BMI, which is also a ratio, and the incidence of type 2 diabetes, which is also a ratio. For our raw results, we have 3 observations. Observation 1, baseline. Observation 2, completion of intervention. And observation 3, completion of high school. For these 3 observations, they all measure BMI, knowledge, and diabetes. When you look at each individual observation block, the data is found using univariate analysis, even though our study findings and interpretations are based on bivariate analysis. In order to be able to make use of the raw results, we are most interested in analyzing the data using inferential statistics so that we can determine if our program had an impact on health outcomes of our population. We performed 3 separate t-tests to compare the data of the experimental and comparison group as they relate to BMI, knowledge, and incidence of type 2 diabetes. We determined that this data collected during observation 2 would be considered our short-term results, and the data then collected during our final observation would be considered our long-term results. Here are our statistical findings from our intervention. The following chart shows our p-value results when we performed the t-test on each strata. We used a threshold of 0.05 to determine if the results were statistically significant. Our null hypothesis is that there will be no difference in the rate of BMI, knowledge, or type 2 diabetes between the individuals in the experimental and the comparison group after the Project Play program. For BMI short-term, we accepted the null, and for BMI long-term, we rejected the null. For the surveys measuring knowledge about nutrition, the short-term we rejected the null, and for the long-term we accepted the null. And to measure the incidence of type 2 diabetes, for the short-term we accepted the null, and for our long-term we also accepted the null. For BMI, over the course of our year-long intervention, our experimental group's average BMI percentile did not change enough to be statistically significant. Upon graduation of high school, however, our experimental group's BMI was statistically lower than the comparison group. For knowledge, at the end of our intervention, those in our experimental group showed a statistically significant increase in knowledge when taking the follow-up survey when tested against the comparison group. However, this difference disappeared with the maturation, and during the final observation, the difference was no longer significant. For incidence of type 2 diabetes, there was no statistically significant difference between the experimental and comparison groups during any of the observations. In conclusion, have the objectives been achieved? All of our process objectives were met, and each of our objectives were partially achieved. Is there any value to our accomplishments? The data show a lack of knowledge on nutrition and behaviors in elementary students that is leveled by high school, but in the end could potentially impact BMI in the long term. We would of course need further studies to show if this correlation is causative. And in conclusion, our study is one of the first intervention studies done in San Diego County dealing with elementary obesity. Most of the previous studies before were research related. So our limitations are as follows. We didn't want it randomized because of the small sample size. The survey is not able to be dichotomized into knowledge and behavior portions. The maturation of students over time will affect their choices in the end, and the risk of subject mortality due to such a long-term study is also a limitation.